Filster is one of my trusted holster makers with great offerings like the Floodlight and trauma medical equipment to keep you and your loved ones safe. They're one of the few companies that I trust to make a quality product at a good price, and I thank them for sponsoring today's video.
Well, already, gang, welcome back to the Active Self-Protection Podcast. I am yet again your host, Mike Wooliver, and I remain, with God's will, your favorite former Fed. With me today is a new friend of mine, James Birtwell. Did I pronounce that correctly, James?
Yep.
Well, first of all, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. He sent me an email. We've been talking back and forth via email. It's mike@activeselfprotection.com, by the way, if you want to reach out to me with a story. James is formerly we're gonna phrase this correctly, a former armed cash transportation specialist. How would you phrase it?
Yeah, that's pretty much nail on the head.
Okay, so he worked armored car. Everyone has seen an armored car and its attendant employees doing their thing, and I'm sure a lot of folks kind of wonder, what's that job like? Well, you're about to find out a little bit here. James is going to kind of share not any industry secrets, of course. So if you're planning on robbing an armored car, you're not going to get any help from James or me, but you will get a bit of a look inside that job and what it's like. And he's got a couple of really, I think, interesting stories. He is in the great state of New Hampshire. Live free or die. He is going to brag, I think, here momentarily about the gun laws in New Hampshire and how fantastic they are. And he is engaged with no kids yet. So congratulations on that, James. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good. I'm happy to be on the podcast, and it's actually my first one I've ever been on. So pretty stoked.
Very good. Well, we're glad to have you first before you blow up. You become a major podcast star. So let's start with your background. Is this a sort of job, or generally the sort of field you always wanted to be in? This sort of lane, I would say, like, corrections, law enforcement, armed security, that sort of thing, are all kind of roughly in the same lane. So is this something you always kind of wanted to do?
Yeah. Ever since I was young, it was kind of, I wanted to get into the armed side of things, and ended up working construction and suffered a knee injury. So, military, law enforcement was kind of like, yeah, it's probably out of the picture. So I'm like, you know what? I'll get my my hand at armed security. And so I just ended up applying to one of the big 3 armored truck companies, and ended up thankfully getting the job. And one state police qualification later, I was carrying a firearm at work, and then that was that.
So were firearms and or self-defense a part of your life prior to taking this job, or is it something, I mean, you said you kind of always wanted to be in that lane, so I would assume so.
Yeah, actually, the ripe age of 8 years old, I got to fire my first firearm. It was a Browning Auto 5 16-gauge shotgun from 1907.
16 gauge. So for people who don't know, the higher the gauge of a shotgun, sort of the less recoil, and the like bird shot, for example, which is very small pellets, is less of a shock to the system than like 12 gauge. Just so people know. So
Yep.
Instead of 16 gauge, so that's a pretty late recoil for a shotgun, right?
Yep. But 8 years old, it was the first one I got to shoot. I'm like, this thing is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, when the bug bites you, it bites you. I remember that my first shooting experiences was around that age, and my kids as well was around that age. And I think that's about the right age. As long as you're capable of safely training your kids, that's a good age to get them started before they have any preconceived notions about what, guns and what they do. So when did you, let me ask you this, did you own and possess firearms prior to this job? And if so, what was your first gun?
So my first gun would have been a 1942 Mosin Nagant, and got that when I was 14 years old. And because 22, my stepfather had a Ruger 1022, 22 ammo was too expensive, because that was during 2013 and 2012 with the whole Obama administration and just everyone buying up ammunition. But spam cans, you can get 880 rounds for $100.
Okay.
That was my 22 growing up.
Very good. So that's an unusual first gun, I have to say. Normally we hear Glock 19, Springfield XD, or Ruger 1022, like you said. So that's an unusual first gun for you to have had. How did you like it? Did I lose you, James?
Oh, lost you for a second. No, you're
Oh,
back.
no worries, no worries. Yeah, so I was saying that's an unusual first gun to have. How did you like that gun? Do you still have
Oh,
it?
I loved it. I ended up going deer hunting with it, and that was kind of my first real firearm. But interestingly enough, my mother did not like that it was so old. So we ended up picking up an M&P 1522,
Hmm.
which it was still a 22, and so I ended up having those pretty close. And then I probably had like 8 or 9 by the time I was 18. Before I was 18,
Mhm.
they had to be locked in my stepfather's gun safe because again I wasn't of age. But if him and I were going to the gun range, or we had a sand pit, uh, we would just take them out.
Nice. No, you love to hear it. So, talk to us about the application process. Do you feel like when you applied for if we'd have said the name of the company, the armored car company, people at home, you'd probably recognize it. But we're not going to mention the name of the company. But when you applied there, what was the application process like? And do you feel like the application process, interview, and the training were sufficient? Like, would you call it enough training? If, for example, you came in off the street and you had no prior experience, would you feel like you got enough training and enough scrutiny during the hiring process?
So they do a great job with the background checks. It took a good month and a half, 2 months to really like get in there, which is awesome. You have your
Sure.
drug test, your physical, but once you get in and you get into the firearm side of things, it is very negative. Essentially, it was myself and another guy that would take time out of our day. We would buy ammo. We would bring handguns and let people shoot. And some people shot for the first time with us.
Hmm.
Now these are people that are going to go out in the street carrying a firearm for a living, and even something as simple as knowing when they can't shoot and what the laws are and if you really should shoot was very lacking. And you really get a sense once you've been there for a little bit that if anything went wrong, they're just going to cut ties with you, and that's it. And I've talked to at least 3 different armor truck companies, and they're all the same. They're all in that churning wheel of just, yep, get another one in, get another one in.
Just a warm body, basically.
Yep.
It's unfortunate. That's unfortunate to hear. Although I can tell you, if you are working at a police department, sheriff's department, federal agency, or whatever, if you screw up in the line of duty, I hate to say it, but 9 times out of 10, your agency doesn't really give a flying crap about you as an individual. If you're a liability to them or even appear to be a liability, excuse me, they will hang your cheese out in the wind in a heartbeat.
Yep.
To avoid getting sued, to avoid any appearance of impropriety. That's just how that is, unfortunately. So it's not that much different. It's probably harder to fire a vested law enforcement officer than someone working an armored car or armed security, but it doesn't change the fact that the amount of care given by your employer is about equivalent, which is not great, which is not a great feeling. Anyway, so once you got this job, about how long was it that you were doing it before the first sort of interesting thing happened that we're going to talk about?
Um, the first super noticeable thing was about a year. There was a lot of little run-ins where people would kind of walk up on you while you're servicing like an ATM, or just people being really negative, and they're like, "Ah, oh, you're just a cop." It's like, no, I'm definitely not. I'm just doing a job. I'm just bringing money around.
I hate to
And,
interrupt,
and
but I have to get this out now because I worked armed security. I worked security before I was in law enforcement, and there seems to be this conception on a lot of people's part that everyone in that field desperately wants to be a cop so bad, and they can't for whatever reason. And usually that reason is negative, and that's just not true. I knew a ton of people who were very proudly that was their career path was a security career path, and there's nothing wrong with that. But for some reason,
yeah,
I think people think that everyone who wears a security uniform and carries a gun has some sort of inferiority complex or desperately wants to be a cop. So I guess that's true sometimes, but frequently not always. They're very happy to do the job they're doing. Would you say that's accurate?
oh yeah, and just a lot of the times it's just that people just look at law enforcement so negative, and they're just anyone that's wearing body armor and carrying a gun for a living, you're automatically a cop, and people don't like you, and it's like why?
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Um, Recent events notwithstanding, it's kind of always been that way. I came up, my first years in LE, actually as an explorer, were right around the time of the Rodney King debacle in LA, and I was all the way out in Maryland in the DC area, and it was rough time. It was kind of like it is now for a while after that, for I think for obvious reasons. But again, you kind of get lumped in with everyone else who remotely looks like you. So let's talk about the first of the two incidents we're here to talk about. I think these are both really interesting and kind of give folks who don't know anything about that line of work a glimpse into the stuff you might run into. They're unusual incidents, but I think they're probably not that unusual if you've done the job long enough. So talk to us about the
Yeah.
first one.
So the first one, I had been the driver for that day, and the guy that I was working with, he was considered my partner. We were always working together,
Mm-hmm.
and we were doing a sequence in a town where, we'd do one stop, another stop, and then we went across the street, did four other stops, and during which we pulled up to a bank, and you know we're me, him, and I are always, we're looking around, what you're supposed to do, keep an eye out on things. Took a survey, got to the next bank. He started unloading, and I guess a vehicle from the previous bank had pulled around back and had parked. And he had warned me, he said, "Hey, that black car was over there, and now it's over here." I'm like, "Oh, that's weird. Maybe they're just like pulling $500 out of each ATM." Then we went across the street and went to a grocery store, and I noticed that same black car.
Oh boy.
I'm like, all right, now this is definitely getting a little strange. And think about this plaza as like a big U. Okay, so the far right of the U is where the grocery store was. The middle was another store that we ended up servicing, and then kind of in the middle of the U, towards the road, is a self-standing ATM,
Okay.
which has a little back door that you walk in and out of if you are the armored truck company or someone servicing, like, for repairing the ATM.
Sure.
That's where you're going to go in and out.
I think everyone's probably seen one of those, a
Yep.
standalone, like in a parking lot. Yeah.
So I see this car, and he's parked horizontally to the parking lanes, and I'm looking at it like, okay, I'm going to go a little bit out of my way, and I'm going to drive by this guy. I'm going to see what's going on.